Let me ask you something. Who actually runs a country? Not who you voted for. Not who stands at the podium with the flag behind them and the practiced smile. Not the name on the ballot. Not the face on the news. Who actually runs it? Because right now, you're sitting in a room that doesn't exist on any government registry. No plaque on the door. No title beneath your name. You're not a minister. You're not a chief of staff. You don't attend press conferences. You don't take questions. But you know every answer. On the table in front of you is a file. Not digital, physical. Brown cardstock, worn at the corners, held shut with a black binder clip. Inside, 214 handwritten pages. Dates. Decisions. Names of people who believe their conversations were private. Timelines that don't match the official record. You've been building it for 7 years. Not because someone asked you to. Not because you were assigned. Because you noticed something that nobody around you seemed willing to name. Something about how power actually moves. How it travels, not through laws, not through mandates, but through moments. Small ones. Quiet ones. The kind that happen in hallways and back seats and rooms just like this one. You didn't create the system. You survived it. And that made you something far more dangerous than anyone who did. You're in a closed room. 16 people around a table. The air is cold, the kind of cold that expensive buildings keep on purpose, like discomfort is a power move. The president is speaking. He says the infrastructure bill will be signed by Thursday. He says it publicly, in the meeting, with advisors present, with aides taking notes on tablets. Thursday. Firm. Committed. Then the room empties. The aides leave. The cameras leave. And in the 4-minute gap between the formal session and the next briefing, the president turns to one man, not you, not yet, and says 3 words quietly. Push it back. No explanation. No context. The man nods once. A new timeline begins, invisible to every journalist who just filed their story about Thursday. You're not shocked. You're curious. Because this isn't deception exactly. It's something more sophisticated. Decisions here aren't made on truth, they're made on reaction management. They calculate not what is correct but what the public can absorb, and when, and in what order. The truth exists. They just decide when it's introduced. You pull a small notebook from your inside jacket pocket. Unlined. Black. You've had it for 3 weeks and this is the first time you open it. You write 2 things, the date. And a single sentence describing what you just saw. Not for exposure. Not yet. For understanding. Because you've just realized something that changes everything. The people in visible power aren't the architects. They're the spokespeople. And somewhere behind every spokesperson, is someone who writes the lines. You tell yourself this is temporary. That you'll figure out how it works, file it away, move on. It happens again 11 days later. A budget report surfaces, internal, not yet public, showing a 19% overrun in 3 key regional programs. Damaging numbers. The kind that trigger committee hearings, opposition press releases, early Sunday morning talk show segments. By Tuesday, 3 major media outlets run a different story. Not a rebuttal. Not a denial. A reframe. The story isn't about the overrun, it's about projected growth over 5 years. Technically accurate. Completely misleading. And it lands before anyone even knows there's a fire to put out. You start paying attention to timing. You notice that narratives shift before facts fully emerge, not after. You notice that media alignment happens too quickly to be organic. 4 outlets. Same framing. Same language. Within 6 hours. You track it, 14 separate instances over 90 days. There's a phrase people inside use that you're not supposed to repeat outside, message synchronization windows. It means the 36 to 72 hours between when damaging information exists internally and when it reaches the press. That window is not wasted. It's worked. Truth isn't hidden here. It's simply reframed early enough that when it arrives, it already feels like old news. You start documenting. Systematically now. Not just impressions, dates, names, the specific language used, the original data versus the public version, the gap between them measured in hours and column inches. By the end of month 3, your notebook is full. You buy another. You're not collecting evidence of wrongdoing exactly. Most of what you're seeing isn't illegal. It's something more unsettling than illegal. It's institutional. It's designed. You tell yourself you're just a researcher. An observer. A careful one. You find out about the audit logs by accident. A junior analyst mentions it in passing, that internal messaging systems are reviewed quarterly. Not just flagged messages. All of them. And the reviews aren't conducted by IT. They're conducted by a unit that reports directly to the Deputy Chief of Staff's office. No announcement. No policy document you've ever been shown. That night, you go home and you do not open your laptop. You sit at your kitchen table and you think about everything you've documented so far. Everything stored in Cloud Sync, in email drafts, in the shared notes application your team uses for briefings. By morning, you've made a decision. You buy a second brown cardstock file and a ballpoint pen, not a stylus, not a keyboard. A pen. You begin transferring. Every key observation, every date, every name, every gap in the official narrative. Handwritten. Dated. Specific. Digital logs get audited. Internal systems flag anomalies and then erase them in the same motion. Memory, even your own, can be pressured, reframed, doubted. But paper sitting in an unregistered location 23 kilometers from your office? That doesn't ping a server. That doesn't generate metadata. That simply exists. You update the file daily. 6:40 a.m., before anything else. You develop a shorthand so the entries are illegible to anyone who doesn't know your system. Names become initials. Dates become reversed. Locations become numbers that reference a personal index only you carry. It becomes a discipline. A ritual. The most honest part of your day. You tell yourself it's just insurance. Leverage you hope to never use. The kind of thing a careful person keeps because the careful thing to do is keep it. It sits in a gray metal box, in a rented unit, under a name that is not yours. It starts with a request that sounds reasonable. A speech needs to be restructured before a regional summit. The original draft has a passage about healthcare spending that is, technically, accurate. But its placement, immediately following a paragraph about rising unemployment, creates an implication that isn't intended. Or rather, an implication that is inconvenient. They ask you to look at the sequencing. You spend 40 minutes on it. You move one paragraph. You adjust the transition sentence. You suggest a 3-word change to the subheading that shifts the emotional register of the entire section from defensive to confident. It works. Perfectly. The speech lands without a single negative headline about healthcare. The implication disappears. The numbers are still there, every journalist who wants to do the work can find them. But the frame is gone. The question never gets asked in the post-summit briefing. They thank you. Not formally. But you're CC'd on 3 more drafts the following week. And this is where it gets complicated. Because you're good at this. You understand how language shapes perception at a level most people in that building don't. You can feel when a sentence is going to land wrong before anyone else in the room notices. And that skill is genuinely useful, even valuable. People with less care than you would do this work worse. You know that. This is how power hides. Not in outright lies. In better told truths, shaped by someone careful enough to know exactly which details to emphasize and which to let breathe. You tell yourself you're protecting stability. That the alternative, a panicked press cycle, a collapsed summit, a policy reversal driven by a bad headline, serves no one. And you're not entirely wrong. But you're not entirely right either. The email comes through a public address, one of 7 you maintain for different layers of your work. This one is used for policy submissions and civic feedback. You check it roughly twice a month. The sender's name is ordinary. The subject line is ordinary. The message is 7 sentences long. A man. Early 40s. A small business owner in a regional district whose infrastructure investment was officially announced, and then quietly deferred for 14 months in a window you documented on page 38 of your file. He isn't angry. He's not writing to a politician or a journalist. He found this address through a civic transparency directory. He just wants to understand why the contract that was supposed to anchor his suppliers for 3 years never materialized. He has 11 employees. 2 of them left last year when the uncertainty became unsustainable. He's not asking for anything. He's just asking. You sit with the email for a long time. Because you know exactly what happened. You were in the room when the sequencing changed. You drafted a summary that made the deferral sound like prudent fiscal management. You helped frame it in language that made it invisible. This man didn't receive a lie. He received a silence. A specifically engineered silence that you helped construct. You go home and you open your file. You read back through 7 months of your own notes. The dates. The gaps. The decisions. And for the first time since you started, the pages don't feel like documentation. They feel like a ledger. A reckoning of accounts you didn't realize you were keeping on behalf of people whose names you never knew. 11 employees. 2 of them gone. 1 email. 7 sentences. You don't write back. You don't know what you would say. You close the file. You don't open it for 3 days. On the 4th morning, you sit down at your kitchen table at 6:40 a.m. You pick up the pen. And you write more carefully than you ever have before. You notice it first as an absence. A shared briefing document you were previously copied on, routine, weekly, nothing sensitive, you're no longer receiving it. Not removed. Just no longer included. No message explaining the change. No revised distribution list forwarded. Simply gone, the way things in this world disappear, without announcement, without acknowledgement, without trace. Then a second thing. A colleague, someone you've worked with across 3 separate administrations, someone who stops by your office every Tuesday without a reason, stops. Not abruptly. Gradually. The Tuesdays become sparse, then absent. His emails become formal where they were once casual. You count 6 behavioral changes in 19 days. Minor individually. Unmistakable as a pattern. Then your internal access changes. You attempt to retrieve a background file on a policy area you've legitimately worked on for 2 years. The system returns a permissions error. Not a crash, a deliberate restriction. You report it to the technical help desk. The ticket is logged. No follow-up ever arrives. Someone knows something. Or suspects it. Which, in a system like this, functions as the same thing. You don't panic. Panic produces visible changes in behavior, and visible changes in behavior confirm suspicion. Instead, you become more ordinary. More predictable. You arrive at the same time each morning. You attend every optional meeting you've ever skipped. You ask unremarkable questions in unremarkable tones. But underneath that stillness, something shifts in you permanently. You realize for the first time that you've been operating as though your invisibility was a fixed condition, a permanent feature of how you'd built your position. You understand now it was never fixed. It was just untested. You weren't the only one watching this whole time. You think about it. Of course you think about it. 214 pages. Names. Dates. Decision trails that contradict public record. The kind of documentation that would take a determined journalist 6 months to assemble, and you have it indexed, annotated, cross-referenced, sitting in a gray box 23 kilometers away. You imagine the release. The moment everything lands. The headlines. The investigations. The immediate, explosive unraveling of carefully maintained narratives. You've seen what happens when something like this surfaces without preparation. You've helped manage the aftermath of smaller revelations, leaks that were a fraction of what you're holding. You know exactly what would happen. Not justice. Not accountability. Not a clean reckoning with truth. Chaos. The kind that discredits the information before it can be processed. The kind where the story becomes the leak itself, who did it, why, what their agenda is, and the actual contents are buried in the noise within 72 hours. Public trust in the institution collapses faster than any replacement can form. The man with 11 employees doesn't benefit from chaos. He benefits from accountability. And accountability requires sequencing. Timing. A public that is ready to receive what they're being shown. Sometimes truth isn't dangerous because it's false. It's dangerous because the people who receive it aren't yet equipped to do anything with it. So you choose delay. Not silence, delay. Strategic patience. You continue updating the file. You start organizing it differently, imagining it as evidence rather than documentation. You think about what a person receiving it cold would need to understand it without you present to explain. You decide to wait for the right conditions rather than create the right explosion. You don't leak. You seed. It starts with a document that is technically public, a Freedom of Information response from 14 months ago, buried 6 pages deep in a departmental archive, unreported because no journalist had reason to look for it. You know it's there. You know what it implies when placed next to 3 other documents that are also technically public, also buried, also unreported. You create an anonymous tip, not with your file's contents. With a breadcrumb. A single sentence directing a mid-level investigative journalist at a regional outlet toward a specific search term in a specific archive. That's it. No attachment. No context. No name. The journalist takes the breadcrumb seriously. She spends 3 weeks following it. She pulls the document. She finds the second one herself, you didn't tell her where it was. She makes the connection you expected her to make. She reaches out to a senior colleague at a national outlet. That colleague corroborates with a source of their own, a source completely unconnected to you. The story publishes 6 weeks after your tip. It is well sourced, measured, and devastatingly accurate. You do not appear in it. You are not quoted. You are not implied. The system, for once, is not exposing a whistleblower. The system is simply exposing itself, because someone asked it the right question in the right order. You drop 2 more breadcrumbs in the weeks that follow. Different journalists. Different documents. Unconnected on the surface. Within 4 months, 3 separate investigations are running. None of them know about each other. None of them know about you. And the picture they're assembling is very close to the one sitting in your gray metal box. No one knows it's you. There is no dramatic collapse. This is the part no one prepares you for. You've spent years in proximity to a world that runs on spectacle, on announcements, on decisive moments, on the clean narrative arc of fall and consequence. You expected something like that. Some visible reckoning. What comes instead is slow. A quiet internal investigation, announced in a 3-line statement on a Friday afternoon. A deputy minister who retires unexpectedly, citing personal reasons. A committee hearing that is covered, briefly, on page 7. A second hearing. A third. Public awareness rising not like a wave but like a tide, gradual, almost imperceptible, and then undeniable. Trust in certain institutions erodes 11 points in 9 months. Not a collapse. An erosion. The kind that takes longer to name and is far harder to reverse. You remain unseen through all of it. Still in the same building. Still attending the same unremarkable meetings. Still receiving emails you respond to in measured, unremarkable tones. No one has connected the detail. The near miss dissolved into the noise. You are still here. Still watching. Still taking notes each morning at 6:40. The file is thicker now. 312 pages. A new section, started last month, on the early structural patterns in the investigation itself, how accountability, when it finally arrives, tends to protect the architecture even as it removes certain people from it. You sit with it in the early morning light. The room is quiet. There's a cold coffee on the table beside you, forgotten. The pen is in your hand. You don't feel like a hero. You don't feel vindicated. You feel like what you've always been, someone who sees clearly, who moves carefully, and who understands that in a world built on narrative, the most powerful thing you can possess is a record of what actually happened. If this story made you think differently about how power actually moves, you already know what to do. Hit like, because it tells the algorithm this kind of storytelling matters. Share it with one person who needs to see it. And subscribe, because we're only getting deeper from here. Now, the question I want you to answer in the comments: if you were in that position, holding 312 pages of truth, would you have released everything immediately? Or would you have waited, like you did? There's no right answer. That's exactly the point. Let's talk about it below.